Good day. My name is Dr. Maria Nagy, and I'm going to do a presentation on how to raise funds for your startup. Okay, so I'm going to talk about a number of ways, more than 10, more than 12, actually, about different ways of funding your startup. I'm going to talk to you about some stats. I'm going to talk to you about, give you examples of different companies that have used these different methods. I will tell you about my experience with each of these methods, and then tell you kind of what works and um, how to get your startup funded. So who am I and why am I talking? My name is Dr. Maria Nagy. I have a PhD in microbiology, and I have a biotech startup. Raise over 700,000 for the startup. And I've utilized almost, or at least attempted to utilize almost every single method that I'm going to talk about. And I've probably, in my journey, I've probably pitched over 200 times. So I've learned a fair amount during this process. Okay, so let's talk about the 10 most common ways of funding your startup. There's the bootstrapping, there's the friends, family, and fools, there's the angels, there's the family offices, there's VCs, there's crowdfunding, there's conferences and pitch competitions, there's grants, there's investment bankers, there's loans, lines of credit, university spinoffs, and then I have a bonus one as well to tell you about. Okay, so let's look at the stats. The most common way people will fund their company when they're starting off, when you're at pre-seed or seed, is either is a type of bootstrapping. It's either because they have personal savings or they're utilizing the work. You're going to see that 70, a work income, and you're going to see that 70 to 90% of the time. The next most common way is doing friends and family. That's about 30 to 50% of the time. Then an angel investment round. There are some VCs that will do pre-seed. These are smaller check sizes, so you have to find a VC that is specific to that, but you don't see it often. Okay, this says 10 to 20%, but I feel like it's really a little bit lower than that. You've got accelerators, crowdfunding, and then the rest that I have mentioned. This chart right here takes those numbers and adjusts them to on 100%, right? So this utilizing when you're taking all of them and you try to make them equivalent to 100%, that drops the founder savings down to 36%. And what does founder savings mean? That means the founder has saved up some cash and is investing their own money into their venture. Here's a pie chart because people love pie charts to give you an idea. You'll see that grants, how small of a sliver grants are, and how small of a sliver pitch competitions are, VCs. I mean, just to kind of give you an idea. Okay, so let's talk about the big reward, the VC funding. Everyone wants the badge of honor saying, hey, I'm VC funded. But that doesn't happen that often. 6.5% of the time, according to the numbers that I've crunched, 6.5% of the time, you'll have a VC doing the pre-seed round. So that means 93 or 92.5% of the time, 92% of the time, 93% of the time, I'm sorry, 93% of the time, it's not going to be VC money. Okay, there are some companies that do VCs, and there are some companies that did get their some VCs that do first round checks. There's First Round Capital that funded a company called Superhuman. Notion that we all love and use was funded by first round capital as well. I found another company called Mercury that was funded by Mark Andreessen's group. So it's possible, it's just not popular. Okay. And there was a guy that got VC funding in the building that I worked at. He got VC fundings. He raised 18 million. Okay. And so they actually had a VC, a representative from the VC firm that he raised from, get an office in his area. And so he had his own office down the hall from them. So they watch over their money, right? So just thought I'd tell you that. So, all right. The most popular, I think, in my opinion, is bootstrapping. And this is kind of the smart way of raising or doing your first round, right? Or funding your seed. I break down bootstrapping into 4 different categories, and those are savings, there's corporate job, there's side hustle, and then build as you go, or revenue based. Okay, so I've done 3 out of the 4 of these. I've done savings, I've done corporate job, and I've done side hustle. Okay. And okay, and so I've done, oops, let's go back. Sorry, it's real time. I don't know how to edit, so mistakes are going to stay in there. Okay, so there's 4 kinds. There's the savings, there's corporate jobs, there's the side hustle, and build as you go. And the reason I break it down into 4 different categories because the experience is quite different. So when I started my company, I had been working a corporate job and stockpiling cash because I was renting this cute little bungalow up in the mountains. And I was stockpiling cash because I wanted to make a cash offer. It was listed for 40,000. So, and I wanted to make a cash offer on this thing. So I was stockpiling my cash, and I figured if I could stockpile about 30 grand, maybe he'll take the cash offer and I can get it, right? And so then suddenly the corporate position, it ended. My contract ended, and they didn't have any good other positions to offer me. I didn't like anything that they were offering. And I was like, oh, it's like, oh, wow. Okay. And I had stacked about 25-ish in cash. And I was like, I had just gotten done binge watching a lot of Y Combinator, and I had my startup idea that had been like rolling around like a loose marble in my head for the last 6 years. And I was like, okay, cash, Y Combinator idea, I'm going to do it. So the pro of that is like you're in control, that's your cash, that's your baby, you know. The con to that is once you run out of it, money, then you're like, oops, now I don't have money. And I'm like started on this idea and I got to figure it out. So there's pros and cons to that. The other method that I've done is, working on the startup while having a corporate job. And the reason I put corporate and side hustle into 2 different categories is because with corporate jobs, it's going to be plus or minus right around 100K that you're making. That's what I'm earmarking as a corporate job. And then side hustle is like you're making plus or minus $20 an hour. That's your Uber, your waitressing, your DoorDash, like all these kind of jobs, right? And so the reason I put them into different categories is because let's say you're working a corporate job and you're making 100 grand, which is 8,300 after taxes, right? And let's say you're living like a poor college student, 1,500, let's say up to 2,300 a month, okay? So you're going to have roughly $5,000 or $6,000 out of that income per month to invest into whatever it is you're building. But if you're doing side hustle work, you're making roughly, let's say $20 an hour for 40 hours, that's 800. Let's say after tax to make it a little bit easier, that's 3,600 a month, right? And let's say you're doing the same thing, you're spending about two-ish to live on, to even 2,300 to live on, then you're going to have like maybe $1,000, $1,200 to invest in your startup. And let's say there's a Resi conference that you want to do and it's $3,500 entry fee. Well, if you're doing corporate and you got $5,000 per month, $5,000 or $6,000 to invest per month into your company, then you can easily sign up and do it. But if you're doing side hustle, then you have to save up for 3 months of that little extra cash to fund that thing. So it's like it can be done. It's just a lot rougher. There are some pros, like, you keep your own schedule, you work as much as you want, but you it gets harder because like any big thing you want to do, you can't do because you have to save up for it, right? So there's that. And then build as you go, you're essentially taking the cash the company is making, you're assuming you're making some kind of revenue, some kind of profit, and then you're reinvesting into the company. I've never done that because I've never had revenue like that. Well, in the biotech, right? So with a good example of who does that or who's done that is Mr. Beast. So every time he makes money off a video, he'll take it and reinvest it into the next video. And again and again and again. And he was relentless in doing that. So for him, that method worked. An example of side hustle is if you think of Gymshark, the founder of Gymshark, Ben Francis, who's now worth $1.4 billion. He was side hustling at Pizza Hut. And there was an event that they wanted to do. This is when they were sewing their clothes by hand with a sewing machine and whatever. They wanted to do an event and he needed to get a booth that was $3,000. And he saved up money from Pizza Hut to buy that first booth. And then they made a killing on it, and they were able to move themselves forward. So it can be done with the side hustle. I'm just saying it's just a little bit harder. But the pro is you maintain ownership of your company, you go at your speed. And the other thing that people don't know is you can do loans to your company. So it's like if you're bootstrapping, you're putting your cash in, you keep track of that cash and it's a loan to the company so that years later or at a different time, you can pull that out. But you have to be careful when you can pull that back out and refund yourself, repay it to yourself, and you can do that with interest too. So just things to think about. Let's talk about the next one, friends, family, and fools, as they sometimes call this. This is the next way that you fundraise. And this is actually the way I got my first check, right? So you go around, you make a list of 20 or 30 people that are either high net worth individuals or people that that might be able to write out a check, right? So I did this, and the very, very first check I got was from my sister and her husband, and they wrote me out a $2,000 check. And the feeling from not having a check to having a check, I thought I could conquer the world. I couldn't explain to you. Now, my sister and they were probably just being nice and just investing in me as a person because that's typically what they do is we believe in you as a person. We're going to give you a chance, right? And so the first check was $2,000. The second check was a friend of mine that I went to, well, I kind of knew from school. He knew the science that I was doing. And originally he was going to write out $1,000 check. And I kept talking and talking and talking, and I talked him down to 500, which is not the right way to go. But anyway, he wrote me out a $500 check, and I did it, and I filled out all the documents and I sent it to him. And you know, I was so grateful for that $500 check because I wanted to go to there was an event at YC in San Francisco, and the ticket was $345. So I was like, oh my God, I can fly to YC and, go to this event and whatever, because I wanted to be around the action, the excitement, and I wanted to learn. So I was so very grateful for that $500 check. The next check was a $3,000 check from a friend of mine that I went to school with 20 years ago. We went to college together, and we've been, friends on and off since, but she's very savvy. She's a very savvy investor. And so she was kind enough to write me out a $3,000 check. So that's how I got to my first 5,500. Okay. The cons to that is anytime you see them, Thanksgiving gets really weird because they're always thinking in the back of their mind, they're always thinking about that money they gave you. And you always feel like you always have to give an update. So I want to call my friend that I went to school with, to college with, and say, hey, let's go watch a movie. But then she's like, and we'll go watch a movie, but I feel compelled to always give her an update. Oh, well, we did this, we did that, we did the other. Right. So sometimes Thanksgivings can get weird. And sometimes you start feeling like the turkey gonna get your head cut off. I'm just trying to make jokes, but you get the point. Like it can be risky on a personal level. So that's something you have to take into account. Right? Oops. Okay. Okay, there we go. Let's talk about angel investors. You're going to see that 20 to 40% of the time. Okay. I was very lucky to get some angel investors. So there's three categories that I will talk about. There's angels, there's super angels, and there's angel groups. And so angels typically are high net worth individuals. They're going to write out a check between like, let's say 10 to maybe 100,000, maybe even 250. But typically between 10 to 100,000. Then you have super angels that write out a checks from 250, maybe even up to $1 million. Okay. And then you have angel groups or angel syndicates where you can have 10 angels come together that can each write out a $10,000 check. But, they'll meet monthly or quarterly, and they'll have 10 or 12 startups come and sit or come and present, and they will sit and they will listen. And then you'll probably have a lead investor, and that lead investor is probably the subject matter expert on whatever it is you're presenting, or the one that has the most wisdom of the group. And they'll say, yeah, I'm going to invest 10 grand. And then the other investors will say, well, since Fred is investing and he's really savvy, I'm going to go ahead and invest as well. And then you'll have 10 angels, each writing out a $10,000 check. And then that you can get to 100 grand like that. So sometimes with these angel groups, or to pitch in front of angels, there'll be a fee. Sometimes it's like $120 fee to apply. Sometimes there's not. It just depends. Sometimes there's certain events where they will charge you $1,500 to pitch in front of angels. So just know there's the range, and really just keep your eyes open because you can burn through cash really fast trying to pitch to angels, right? Or Most of the time it's free, okay? Most of the time, where are you going to find them? It's either going to be a warm intro, like, hey, do you know of any angels that you can introduce me to? It'll be on your LinkedIn, it'll be on your X, it'll be on your social media because they're always looking for deal flow. Okay. I'm just saying on the outskirts of that, there are some situations that are called pay to play. And then you pay to pitch in front of these angels. So there's the gamut. That's what I'm trying to teach you. And you want to figure out what your investor avatar is, right? So if you're trying to raise 100,000, you're going to need 10 angels that can write out $10,000 checks, right? Or one angel that can write out $100,000 check. It needs to be in your field. So if you're doing healthcare AI, you want to find a healthcare AI angel that can write out checks in that range. Sometimes it helps if they're in your city. So all these things are little point things that will help that situation. You're also going to have accredited and not accredited. So with accredited, they accredited means that they are high net worth individuals with $1 million or more as their net income, and then non-accredited is under $1 million. So they're assuming, or the government that is assuming with the accredited investors, they are a little bit more savvy. They've played the game enough to where they can invest. So just keep that in mind. It's better to err on the side of accredited because, they have more wiggle room than with a non-accredited investor, right? Some examples of companies or people that have raised with angels. You got Jeff Bezos, his first round, he was trying to raise, I think, $1 million for Amazon. He did 60 pitches. He had roughly 40 people say no, and then 22 people say yes, and they each wrote out a $50,000 check. And so that's how he got to his first million, right? I've pitched to a number of angel investors as well. You know, so, rejection is part of the game and it can be done. You just have to stay diligent. Okay, family offices. So family offices are going to be a family, a high net worth family that are investing individually, devoid of a VC firm or something like this. They're kind of like angels, but they're a family office, so they're investing family money, like Johnson and Johnson or other high net worth family, right? There's an advisor or a family member that's looking for deal flow and things like this. And I've pitched to family offices twice. One time it was to like an advisor. It felt just like pitching. It felt like the equivalent of pitching to an angel. And then the second time I pitched, it was to a family member who ran their own family office. And I said, how many pitches do you listen to per year? And he's like, oh, 3,000. I said, really? 3,000? That's like 10 or 12 pitches a day that you're flipping through. Okay. And I said, well, how many companies are you investing in if you're looking at 3,000 decks? He said, 2. So just think on that a little bit. Okay, investment bankers. So what are investment bankers? So investment bankers they negotiate, they find you investors. Whether it's with a VC or with angels, they find you the investors. In theory, sounds great. Oh, I'm just going to pass off my fundraising to the investment banker. I worked with one for 2 years, or we worked with one for 2 years. So I met them through a conference, and they courted us very hard. Um, pretty aggressively. And that was great. So they had a team of 5 or 6 people working on our stuff. It was very serious, like they don't play. They do extensive due diligence on you, like every single document you've ever signed or written, everything they look at. Every single pitch deck you've ever done, every single email that you've ever written. They look at your science, they look at your studies, they look at your P&Ls, they look at everything. So the thought process is that they do a thorough due diligence on you. They make your decks and everything, and then they pitch. I'm sorry, then they pitch on your behalf. Okay. And there's a front end fee, a back end fee, there's a success fee. So there's and what they'll do is they have some cherry picked investors, they keep the relationships up and running, and they'll send your deck out to they'll start with 60 and get the feedback and see how that goes, and then they'll go to the next 60, and then they'll keep going until you get funded, in theory. We weren't successful with them, but they worked their butts off. They were very serious. They don't play. That's what I gotta say. But that's the best deck I've ever seen for a company. Like, beautiful. So that's what I have to say about that. Oh, but they were also raising money for us in 2023 and 2024. So, and that's like was the worst fundraising time for biotech since 2008. So, and we were one of their first biotech companies. So I forgive them for that. So, they were coming from a different vertical. So anyway, okay, good. Let's talk about crowdfunding. So I did crowdfunding twice. The first time I raised roughly 140K, the second time about 65K. And I raised on the platform WeFunder. Yeah, and there are 2 different types of crowdfunding platforms. There's the equity-based, and then there's the product-based. And so the equity-based is that you're essentially giving away bits of your equity, right? And then the product-based, like an example of equity-based is Republic, WeFunder, and Start Engine. An example of product-based is Kickstarter. So with Kickstarter, you're having a widget, some kind of widget that you're essentially pre-selling, right? So there's a company called Pebble, and Pebble made these beautiful hand wristwatches, and they raised on Kickstarter. There's another group called Oculus. They do the robots, and they raised on the equity based, and they raised like over $1 million. There are other companies that raise those big amounts, but I think the difference between what we did and what they do. Sometimes there was a musical called Meow, and they raised, over $1 million in 48 hours. So what they did that was different than what we're doing is that they did like 6 months worth of email drip campaign before it was time to open the doors and fundraise. Open the doors, right? What we did is we got on the website and we're like, okay, what do we do now? And then we learned and backpedaled and, just made it happen. Again, there's a lot of reach out. There's a lot of email. There's a lot of marketing. Your ROI, just know you have fees and you have to do marketing. And so 1 to 3 maybe more. So every dollar you put in, you'll get three. You'll make three. So it's like sometimes more, sometimes less. I mean, sometimes more. But it's hard. I earned every single dollar that I made on there because it's like your phone calls, your emails, 1 o'clock in the morning, you're emailing people, you know, and then they also take a fee. So, and like with WeFunder, you have to raise 50,000 before you can even keep the money. So if you raise under 50, they won't let you keep the money, or they won't take the money from the investors. But so you have to raise, and before they even will advertise you on the WeFunder website, you have to raise 50. So there's that. And what else? But the nice thing is people can write out checks of $100 or more. So like my mom invested, $100, and my other friend invested $100. Like it's a lot easier. But then on your cap table, they pool all those investors into a bubble, and then on your cap table, it's one line. So you don't really, even though you may end up with 400 investors, you only have one line on your cap table. So let's talk incubators and accelerators. Incubators and accelerators. Incubators, depending on which ones you go to, they can write out checks from anywhere from 50 to 350. They get in exchange for a percent of your company, typically like 5%, just depends. And then they give you guidance and mentorship and stuff. Some write out checks, some don't. Like I know Y Combinator, IndieBio, and Techstars, they write out checks. ATDC, which I was a part of, they didn't write out checks, or not at the level that I was playing the game, right? So they're typically free to apply to. Y Combinator is highly competitive. They have like a 1.5% acceptance rate. ATDC will accept everyone, but they charge a $25 a month. But they teach you a lot of stuff. They teach you like how to do your deck. They teach you a lot of stuff. They introduce you. They help you figure out how much to raise. They teach you product market fit. They teach you a lot of stuff. So I did probably 3 different accelerators. I interviewed for Y Combinator a couple of different times, never got in. I interviewed for IndieBio. I applied for IndieBio on a Friday night at 11 o'clock. Monday morning, they called me for an interview. I was like, whoa, but I didn't get in. So, that's just the way it is. But I ended up doing 3 different incubator programs. So none of them gave money. Okay, the next one is grants. You got your government grants, and then you have your company grants. So your government grants are like your SBIR, your NIH, your NSF. So they can write out $1 million, $1 million checks and such, or you can get $1 million grants. And you typically will look to see if there's one that you can apply for. You normally write a 3-pager. Based on that 3-pager, they'll decide if they want you to apply or not. There's one particular that we applied for. I think it was $1.5 million grant. It turned out to be 85 pages in length, and it took us a solid month and a half to write. Then 9 months later, you find out that you don't get it. And we applied to, I've probably done 12 of those and haven't gotten a grant yet. On the other side, there's BioFire. And so BioFire raised 50 million in grants. So what I have learned is if they like you and they give you one grant and you succeed, and you accomplish the goal that they give you that money for, then it's much easier to get the next grant and the next grant and the next grant. And then a fun story is Dr. Kaylin Karuko. She's Hungarian. I should be able to pronounce that name. But anyway, she was the one that came up with the mRNA technology for the mRNA vaccines. And she ended up getting a Nobel Prize for that technology, right? And all the COVID vaccines were based on mRNA technology. She had struggled for years, and prior to her Nobel Prize, she never received NIH grant money. So I don't feel as bad. Oh, and then the other type of grants that you can apply for are your company grants, like your company, like Verizon, like Lancome, like FedEx, Visa. They all do, $5,000 grants, $10,000 grants, 100,000, 250. So you can just find these different grants by doing YouTube searches and then just apply. So I've heard wild stories. One where, you got so many applications that like you can't get them. But then if you pick some random grant that's very niche, like you could be the only one applying for it. So it's like there's both of the spectrum. We've never gotten one of these. The Verizon grant application took me 15 or 20 minutes. They asked me to watch like 3 or 4 videos, and then 4 months later, I find out that I didn't get the grant. And then I applied for a couple other ones. Some are very long applications, some are very short. It's like the lottery. You can play it. Some people do great with them. They put all their efforts into just grant application, and then they get really good at it. So, okay, then you got conferences and pitch contests. So you're going to have these conferences like Resi or Venture young startup ventures, and there's a whole myriad of them across the U.S. There's SEMDA, and so there are opportunities to apply. You can pitch, and then you can mingle with investors, whether it's done in person or it's done virtually. So an application to apply for Resi or something, I think it was roughly $3,500. Other ones can be $1,500. I'm just saying, Then you apply separately to pitch, and they take a handful, like 10 or 15 groups that will pitch. And they will pitch in front of a panel of investors. It may or may not be attached to a pitch contest. I did one for SEMDA that was a $10,000 pitch contest. And then I did Resi. And so the trick with that is you'll get a list of 200 investors that are going to that conference. You go through and you research all 200 investors. Take 3 to 5 minutes per thing, and you research. And then you find 40 or 50 that are a good fit, that match your investor avatar. And then you reach out to them. And at the conference, they have opportunities where you can set up times to speak with them. But you could do that outside of a Resi conference or outside of a conference. There's definitely pros to attending these conferences, and you learn a lot, and you see, and the pitches are incredible, right? With Resi, it was just nonstop pitches for 3 days. For other ones, there's just a small window where you get pitches. So, and then you can watch other people pitch, and you can learn like, oh, do this, don't do that. Like, wow, this was fantastic. Why was it fantastic? But then they have this period of time where you can request opportunities to talk with different groups, like 15-minute slots, or to talk to these different investors. I think that was very, very useful. I ended up, I think I reached out to 40, talked to 20, and had several conversations with 3. And that's how I got my investment bankers too. So there's that. Okay, let's talk about bank loans, lines of credit, and credit cards. So you can, if you're a revenue-based company, then you can get loans for either your tech. I mean, if you need to purchase equipment, an equipment loan, or you can get revenue-based. So it's a multiple of whatever your monthly revenue is. And it's seems to be a relatively easy process. You show 3 bank statements, and they just do a credit search. So something like this. I never ended up going that route because we're biotech, so we weren't doing revenue up in the front, like, um, lines of credit, I've done that before, and credit card, I've done that before. You just have to be very thoughtful about what you're using that money. If you're not going to get an immediate return on the use of the money, these are terrible ways to fund your company. There's this very interesting story about Airbnb where they say that they had a baseball card book, baseball card holder book, and they had credit cards in there as they were using it to fund their company. I think personally, I mean, I've done credit cards, but I think personally it's a terrible idea. And because you're going to end up paying that plus the high interest. So and then if you're cash strapped or if you're bootstrapping, I mean, don't do it. But you're going to do whatever you're going to do, but it's not the best. Unless if you know you're going to get an immediate return for something that you're doing. Anyway. And then the last one that I'm going to tell you about, this bonus one, is called gimmick products, right? And so 2 fantastic examples are from Airbnb, right? So Airbnb early on, this is like before they got any kind of funding, they went to a Democratic convention, and they had a booth, and then decided that, they have to come up with something. And their airbed and breakfast. So they decided to make these collector item cereal boxes, Obama O's and Captain McCain's. And so there's this wonderful story from Brian Chesky that they had gotten his friend to make these boxes, cereal boxes for them to print them. But they didn't realize that when they got the boxes that they were going to be laid flat. And so they were hot gluing these boxes. And they ended up selling 600 boxes or so. And they were charging roughly about $50 a box. And they made $30,000, but it's a gimmick. It's catchy, it's a collector's item, it's cute. And the other story is that when they went to go pitch a Y Combinator, is that they gave Paul Graham these boxes and said, hey, look, we did this to raise 30K. I just wanted to give you this, at the end of the interview. And it was that kind of pivoted them into like if that Paul Graham was like, well, if these guys have this level of hustle and grit, then we have to let them in. Yeah. And then the other one that I'm going to tell you about is Elon Musk, right? So with the Boring Company, they needed to raise funds. And so he came up with selling these, not a flamethrower, right? So these are roofing guns, right? And so they sell 20,000 at $500 a pop. They raised $2 million. Now, mind you, you can say, yeah, Elon Musk has this following and makes it easy, but it's like that was pretty creative. It was a limited edition, it was creative, and they sold it at a price point that's not ridiculous. I mean, yeah, $500 is a $500, but it's still within the range of if somebody really wants it, they can get it, right? It's somewhat accessible price point. So, and it created media buzz and it created cash. So it's like, you can always think of these gimmicky kind of things. And I tried to do this and I opened a Shopify store and I did items like t-shirts and hats and things. I sold 2 items. I think a cup and a shirt. But the difference between what I did and what they did is that these are gimmicky and they're clever. And me, I just did basic t-shirts. So anyway, it's lesson learned. But at the end, combining all of these methods, I was able to, fund the company and keep it going. And we're still going, right? So it's just grit, it's determination. You just keep going. And I have one last shot of inspo for you. Howard Schultz, the CEO of Starbucks, he wanted to buy the bustling, the little tiny Starbucks when it was early on. And it cost him 3.8 million. He raised 3.8 million. This was in 1987. He pitched 242 times within 90 days to raise the 3.8. He got rejected 217 times.